The pie dish slipped from Nora Bennett's fingers and shattered across the airport floor. Ceramic shards scattered like the sound of her heart cracking. Around her, the Austin Bergstrom Arrivals Hall roared with laughter and reunions. But no one noticed the woman in the green cardigan kneeling to gather what was left of something she had baked for a family that forgot she existed. 3 hours earlier, her son Adrian had said, "We'll be there the moment you land, Mom. The kids can't wait." Now her phone sat silent in her palm. She reread the message for the 5th time. It still ended with a red heart. She had believed that meant love. How naive. Everywhere she looked, people were being claimed, soldiers lifted into arms, children squealing, partners kissing under fluorescent light. Everyone had someone waiting. Everyone except her. Nora stood beneath the arrival sign, suitcase upright, coat folded neatly over her arm, refusing to look like a woman forgotten. She had flown from Savannah that morning after Adrian's unexpected call 3 days earlier. He rarely called. His voice had been unusually warm. "You doing anything for Thanksgiving?" She told him she planned to stay home, roast a small chicken, maybe bake a pie. "The kids want you here," he'd said. "It wouldn't feel right without you." Those words had melted her guard. It had been years since anyone said they wanted her, not just needed her. So she packed carefully. The pie dish her late husband once used, her softest cardigan, books for the grandchildren, chocolate truffles for Bianca, Adrian's wife. She even paid extra for a seat with more leg room, thinking comfort might make her feel less like an obligation. The flight was calm. She smiled at a baby across the aisle, shared a knowing nod with another older woman reading a paperback, both travelers with the same quiet dignity of those who keep moving, even when no one waits at the other end. When the plane landed, Nora smoothed her skirt and polished her small black heels. She wanted to look like a guest, not an afterthought. Now, 40 minutes after landing, her back ached, but she refused to sit. Sitting meant surrender. The crowd around her thinned until the announcements echoed against empty space. Then a familiar notification pinged. Her heart jumped. A message? No, just social media. She opened it anyway and froze. Adrian, Bianca, little Ellie and Jonah, her family, smiling in a photo lit by candles and laughter. The caption read, "Full house, full hearts. Happy Thanksgiving from our family to yours." A golden pie sat in the center of the table, not hers. Nora stared until her reflection blurred in the glass. There was no mistake, no seat for her. She didn't cry. She simply gathered her things and began walking, past the taxi line, past the shuttle signs, past strangers who smiled without knowing her name. Outside, the Texas sky was pale blue and wind stung. Exhaust fumes mixed with the scent of cinnamon pretzels. She stopped near the curb and breathed, her lungs tightening with cold. 3 days ago, she'd felt alive again. Now she felt hollow. She watched another family pull up, teenagers running into the arms of grandparents. Even strangers remembered their own. Her phone buzzed again. A calendar reminder, Thanksgiving dinner, 5 p.m. How precise. She typed a message, landed safely, waiting at arrivals. Her finger hovered. Then she saw the photo again, the turkey carved, the clock behind them reading 4:30. Dinner had already begun. She deleted the draft. A man pushing a stroller smiled as he passed. She nodded back. Funny, she thought, how a stranger's glance could hurt more than her family's silence. Across the lot, a neon sign flickered. Lone Star Diner. The red letters blinked through the dusk. She tightened her coat. The thought of sitting somewhere warm, holding a cup of tea without apology, felt better than waiting for redemption that would never come. She started walking, suitcase wheels rattling against the pavement. Her heels clicked like punctuation to every unspoken word. She was done begging for inclusion. Halfway to the diner, she stopped beside a trash bin and looked at the pie she'd carried so carefully across 2 states. Its crust was still perfect under the foil, fragrant with cinnamon. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You'll taste better here," she whispered, pressing the foil closed again. When she reached the diner, the bell above the door jingled. Warm air wrapped around her, thick with the smell of coffee and fried potatoes. Behind the counter, a young waitress looked up. "Happy Thanksgiving, ma'am." Nora met her eyes, steady and calm. "Same to you," she said. For the first time that day, she meant it. Steam rose from the mug in front of her, curling like smoke from something that had burned too long. The diner was nearly empty, bathed in the orange glow of a flickering neon sign. Outside, cars rolled down the Austin highway, families heading home to light and laughter. Inside, Nora Bennett sat alone in a corner booth, her suitcase beside her like a quiet companion. The waitress, a young woman with freckles and weary eyes, set a menu on the table. Her tag read, "Lena." "Kitchen's slow tonight," she said, "but we've got turkey, mashed potatoes, and pie." "Pie," Nora said. "Pumpkin. And some tea, please." Lena smiled, soft and unhurried. "Coming right up." Nora watched the reflection of herself in the window. The woman staring back looked older than she felt, tired but composed. Her cardigan still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the pie she'd baked that morning, the one still sitting untouched in her suitcase. She'd carried it across 2 states like a symbol of belonging, only to learn her family had already begun dinner without her. Lena returned with a plate and steaming mug. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said. "Same to you," Nora murmured. The pie was warm, the crust uneven, the whipped cream sliding to one side. She took a bite. It was sweet and imperfect, comforting in its ordinariness. For the first time that day, she didn't rush. She didn't check her phone. She didn't wait for anyone. A small sign near the counter caught her eye. "Letters for the lonely, take one, leave one." Beneath it, an envelope rested in a glass jar, edges soft from many hands. When Lena passed by again, Nora asked, "What's that?" "Oh, that?" Lena said. "People write notes for strangers. Kind words, little reminders that someone cares. It's silly, but it helps." "Does it?" "Most days, yeah." Lena's smile lingered before she turned away. Nora stared at the envelope for a long moment. Her hand twitched, tempted to reach for it. But she didn't. She'd spent a lifetime offering comfort to others, her husband, her son, her grandchildren. Tonight she couldn't bring herself to take any in return. Her phone buzzed. 2 missed calls from Adrian. 1 text. "Mom, where are you? We thought your flight was tomorrow. No apology, just confusion." She turned the phone face down. Outside, wind scattered leaves along the parking lot. Inside, the hum of the heater filled the silence. Nora took another bite of pie. The warmth settled deep in her chest, fragile but real. "Everything okay?" Lena asked gently as she set down the check. "Yes," Nora said. "It's all right. You want another slice to go?" Nora hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please." "Best decision you'll make all day," Lena said, smiling. Nora paid in cash and left a generous tip. When she stepped outside, the air stung her cheeks. The white takeout bag swung lightly from her hand, the second slice of pie inside, small but solid, something that belonged entirely to her. She walked the 15 minutes to a nearby motel, her suitcase wheels clattering over cracked pavement. Streetlights hummed, and the faint glow of a gas station marked her path. Each step loosened the knot in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, but the motion itself felt like freedom. The motel's sign buzzed. Sunset Lodge weekly rates. Inside, a man behind the counter watched football on a small TV. "Need a room?" he asked. "Yes. 1 night. Single?" "Single." The word carried both loneliness and relief. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, but the heater worked, and that was enough. She set her suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged beneath her, sighing with her weight. She opened the takeout box. The second slice of pie was slightly smashed but still sweet. She ate it with her fingers, letting the crumbs fall on the paper napkin. It tasted better than the first, maybe because this one was hers alone. When she finished, she took out her small notebook and wrote carefully, "I am not spare. I am not extra. I am not a side dish at someone else's table." She underlined the words twice. The pen pressed deep enough to mark the next page. Outside, a car door slammed. Someone laughed. A dog barked. The sounds were distant, belonging to another life. For years she had chased those lives, visiting when called, helping when needed, waiting for a place at a table that was never truly hers. Now she sat in a cheap motel, pie crumbs on her lap, and felt something startling. Peace. She stood, drew the curtains closed, leaving a thin line where the red neon light spilled through. It painted her hands the color of new resolve. She turned off the lamp, leaned back against the pillows, and whispered, "Tomorrow, I start over." And this time, she knew she would. Morning light slipped through the thin motel curtains, drawing pale stripes across the bedspread. Nora Bennett woke before her alarm, as she always had. Habit, not anticipation. After years of early mornings, her body still obeyed, even when her heart had stopped expecting anything. She sat up slowly, her knees stiff, the air faintly sharp with bleach and old carpet. On the nightstand lay her notebook, open to last night's words. "I am not spare. I am not extra." In daylight, the sentence no longer looked like pain, but resolve. She brewed a cup of motel coffee, thin, bitter, almost metallic, and stared at her phone blinking on the table. 3 missed calls from Adrian, 1 text from Bianca. "We didn't mean to forget. Can you come by today? The kids want to see you. No apology, just revision." She deleted them all. By 7:30, she had packed, dropped the key at the front desk, and stepped into the cold Texas morning. The sky was washed pale blue, the air smelling faintly of cedar and distant bread. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward town, suitcase rattling behind her like a stubborn echo. The streets were quiet, shop signs still dark, only the soft hum of a passing bus. A church marquee flashed half its message, "You are seen." The irony made her smile without humor. At the corner near the bus stop, she noticed a folding table surrounded by volunteers in bright scarves, handing out coffee and envelopes. A hand-painted sign read, "Pen Friends, write a letter to someone lonely." A woman with silver hair and a denim jacket called out, "Morning, want to write one?" Nora paused. "Do I have to know them?" The woman laughed. "No, honey. Sometimes it's easier when you don't." Nora sat. The woman slid a pen and a single sheet of paper toward her. For a long minute, Nora just stared at the blank page. Then she wrote slowly, "You are not invisible. Someone out there is thinking of you today." The woman leaned closer, smiling. "That's beautiful." "Maybe it's just true," Nora said. "I'm Janine," the woman offered, shaking her hand. "Nora." They exchanged a small, knowing nod, the kind of understanding only 2 women past 60 could share. When Nora walked away, she felt lighter. The act of writing for someone unseen steadied her. For years, she had given to those who expected, not those who needed. Her thoughts turned to Adrian, the first rent payment she'd covered when he was 20, the tuition checks, the temporary loans for Bianca's boutique. Love had blurred into duty so gradually she hadn't noticed until now. She had been useful, not cherished. A bus passed, windows flashing sunlight. She caught her reflection, a lined face but upright, eyes clear. For the first time, she recognized the woman looking back. At the next lamppost, a flyer flapped in the wind. Community Writing Group. Share your story. Someone needs to hear it. She tore off the slip with the address and tucked it into her pocket. The next bus arrived with a hiss of brakes. Nora boarded, dropped coins into the slot, and sat by the window. The driver nodded a polite good morning. She watched the city drift by. Gas stations, schools, a mother walking her child to the curb, life moving forward. For once, she didn't feel left behind. At the airport, she booked a one-way ticket back to Savannah. The agent asked, "Business or pleasure?" "Neither," Nora said. "Clarity." The woman blinked, printed the ticket, and smiled as if unsure whether to wish her luck. Nora carried the ticket to a cafe overlooking the runway. She sipped tea and watched planes rise through thin clouds, each ascent clean and final. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from Adrian. "Mom, please call. We can explain." She turned the phone off. The silence that followed felt merciful. On the plane, she chose the window seat. The city below shrank to a scatter of light and roadways. She watched until the ground disappeared into white. She thought of her life, years of saying yes, of showing up, of shrinking herself to fit smaller and smaller spaces at other people's tables. She had mistaken endurance for grace. But grace, she now knew, was the quiet strength to stop. The hum of the engine filled her ears. She opened her notebook again and wrote beneath last night's vow, "Next time, I'll remember me first." She underlined it once. Sunlight spilled across the wing, washing her reflection in gold. For the first time in years, she smiled, a small, real smile that belonged to no one but her. Tomorrow, she thought, she would go home, not to anyone waiting, because no one was, but to herself. And that, finally, was enough. The flight home was quiet, just the low hum of engines and the soft rustle of coats. Nora Bennett sat by the window, watching clouds drift like silk curtains across a pale sky. When the plane landed in Savannah, she didn't stand right away. She waited until the aisle cleared, until silence felt like hers again. Outside, the air was damp and heavy with pine and salt. The taxi ride took her through familiar streets shaded by moss-covered oaks. Houses she'd passed for decades looked exactly the same, as if nothing in the world had shifted but her. The driver tried small talk, but Nora only nodded, eyes tracing the fading light. Her porch light glowed when the car stopped, a habit she'd never broken, leaving it on for herself. Inside, the house met her with silence. The creak of old floorboards, the radiator's sigh, the faint smell of lavender polish. She placed her suitcase by the stairs. Everything stood where she'd left it. The framed photos, the neat table, the empty chair. The stillness was no longer cruel. It was simply honest. She changed into an old sweater and made tea. The kettle whistled unevenly, the sound of something both fragile and familiar. She sat at the kitchen table, warming her hands on the cup. Her eyes moved toward the drawer by the fridge, the one labeled Bills and Receipts. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, neat stacks of envelopes waited. Among them, a thick folder marked Adrian. She pulled it out. Inside were records of years, copies of checks, loan receipts, tuition slips, transfers marked temporary. She traced her finger over Bianca's handwriting on an old note. "We'll pay you back soon. Promise." They never had. Nora spread the papers across the table, a quiet storm of ink and obligation. Every page was proof of how she had poured her savings, her time, her care into other people's comfort. She had called it love. They had called it help. Somewhere along the way, the difference disappeared. The clock ticked. The tea went cold. She reached for her notebook and wrote carefully on a blank page, "This isn't revenge. It's correction." The words steadied her pulse. Line by line, she listed every expense, every sacrifice disguised as generosity. When she finished, the page looked clean, sharp, final. As daylight faded, she sat back, feeling no anger, just clarity. The house was silent, but it was her silence now. She reheated soup from the freezer and ate standing by the counter. Outside, streetlights flickered on, and a child's laughter echoed faintly from down the block. Life continued, soft and unbothered. After dinner, she opened another drawer, the one labeled legal. Inside lay her will, written years ago after her husband's passing. She unfolded the document carefully. The words were still neat. All assets to be divided equally between my son, Adrian Bennett, and his family. Her hand hovered over the phrase, his family. She whispered it once, then again, until it lost meaning. That version of family was gone. She folded the paper and set it aside. No bitterness, no grief, just decision. Tomorrow she would visit her lawyer. Nora moved to the window, holding her cup, and looked outside. The street glowed under soft amber light. Across the road, her neighbor's wind chime swayed even though the air was still. She thought of the volunteers she'd met earlier that day, of Janine's gentle smile and the letter she'd written for a stranger. You are not invisible. Maybe that letter had been meant for her. At 9, she settled onto the couch, pulling a blanket over her knees. The radiator's rhythm filled the room like a heartbeat. For once, she didn't wish for anyone to call. The quiet didn't ache. It breathed. On the coffee table lay an unopened envelope, her husband's old insurance policy. She ran her thumb along the embossed logo, then placed it aside for tomorrow. Everything could wait one more night. The house creaked, settling into itself. Nora listened, unafraid. She had spent years surrounded by noise, requests, excuses, obligations. Silence, she realized, was not loneliness. It was proof of survival. Before heading upstairs, she turned off the lamp and paused at the foot of the staircase. The living room glowed faintly from the streetlight outside, painting long shadows across the floor. Her husband's voice came back to her, something he had said once while fixing a broken window latch. You're the backbone of this family, Nora, the strong one. She smiled, not sadly, but with understanding. She was still strong. Only now, her strength belonged to herself. Tomorrow, she whispered into the still air, I'll make some changes. And for the first time, the word didn't sound frightening. It sounded like freedom. Morning rain softened the savannah sky, turning the streets silver and quiet. Nora Bennett stood by her kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching raindrops gather on the glass. The decision she'd made the night before no longer felt impulsive. It felt overdue. Today, she would reclaim her life. After breakfast, she put on her navy coat and drove downtown. The rain had faded to mist, leaving the sidewalks slick and shining. She parked outside a red brick building with brass letters, Halpern and Associates, attorneys at law. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. The receptionist, a polite young man, looked up. Good morning, ma'am. Appointment? With Mr. Halpern, she said. Tell him it's Nora Bennett. A few minutes later, she was ushered into the office. The same oak shelves, the same ticking wall clock, the same framed photo of Mr. Halpern's dog in a Santa hat. He rose from behind his desk, smiling warmly. Mrs. Bennett, it's been too long. Too long, she agreed, shaking his hand. What brings you in today? I need to revise my will, she said, calm and direct. His brow lifted slightly. All right. What changes are we making? She unfolded a document from her purse and placed it on his desk. Remove my son, Adrian, as beneficiary. Everything goes into a trust for my granddaughter, Emily. He studied her, thoughtful but kind. That's a big change. May I ask why? Because love without respect isn't love, Nora said evenly, and I'm done mistaking obligation for affection. He nodded slowly. Understood. Emily's a good choice. Nursing school, isn't she? She is. Hardworking, kind. She still calls just to talk. Do you want her to have full access immediately? Not until she finishes school, Nora said, but I want everything secure. House, savings, insurance, all of it. I'll keep control while I'm living. Of course. He made notes quickly. We'll draft the papers in a few days. Would you like this kept confidential? Yes. No notifications until it's signed. He smiled. Understood. When Nora stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The city smelled clean. She walked to a small bakery on the corner, ordered a roll and black tea, and sat by the window. The warmth of the cup seeped into her palms. For the first time in years, she felt unburdened. Back home, she changed into a soft cardigan and opened the kitchen window. Damp air carried the scent of wet leaves. She sat at the table, found a note card, and began a letter to her granddaughter. My dear Emily, you once told me I was your safe place. You may not know how much that meant. I want you to remember, kindness is not weakness. It's strength that asks for nothing back. Be kind, but don't shrink yourself to fit small hearts. You owe the world your light, not your silence. She paused, then continued. This Thanksgiving didn't go as planned, but disappointment has a way of showing truth. I've learned that love without gratitude becomes habit, and habit without care becomes a cage. I hope you never live inside one. She signed the letter, sealed the envelope, and wrote Emily's address in careful script. That afternoon, she walked 3 blocks to the post office. The clerk, a woman with bright red glasses, smiled. Rainy day for errands, huh? I don't mind, Nora said. Some things can't wait. The clerk weighed the envelope. All set. Thank you, Nora said, watching it disappear into the outgoing bin. Walking home, she didn't bother with her umbrella. The drizzle clung to her coat and hair, cool but refreshing. For years, she had hurried to meet everyone else's needs. Today, she moved at her own pace. When she reached her porch, jasmine vines shimmered with rain. She hung her coat, set the kettle on, and sat by the window. Outside, the light was fading to silver gray. Inside, everything was still. The letter was mailed. The will was changing. Her silence no longer meant surrender, it meant peace. She brewed another cup of tea, breathing in the steam. The world beyond her window could do what it wanted. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for permission to exist. As twilight settled, she opened her notebook and wrote a single line beneath yesterday's entry. Today, I began setting things right. She underlined it once, then closed the cover. The sound of rain deepened outside, steady and calm. She leaned back in her chair, let the warmth of the tea fill her chest, and whispered to the empty kitchen, finally. The word didn't sound lonely. It sounded free. The next morning broke cold and bright, the kind of winter sun that made the air feel sharper. Nora Bennett stood by the window, fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, watching sunlight pour across the quiet Savannah street. The world looked rinsed clean after the rain. So did she. After breakfast, she opened the drawer labeled Legal. Inside were neat folders, mortgage, insurance, savings. She pulled out the one marked Adrian. Checks, receipts, transfers, tuition payments, proof of every time she had rescued her son. Looking at them now, she felt no anger, only recognition. Love had been her language. They had translated it into convenience. She closed the folder and placed it aside. By 9, she was dressed and walking toward the bank. Frost glittered on lawns, the air crisp and steady. The city glowed under clear light, old oaks arching over narrow streets. At Savannah First Trust, the teller greeted her with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. How can we help you today?" "I'd like to speak to someone about my accounts," Nora said. She was led to a small office with glass walls. A young woman entered, her name tag reading Natalie Grant. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. What can I do for you?" Nora sat composed. "I want to stop all automatic payments and transfers to family members, effective immediately." Natalie blinked, then nodded carefully. "All of them?" "Yes, everyone." The banker began typing. "That includes monthly transfers to Adrian Bennett, insurance, tuition, allowance, all of it," Nora interrupted. "Understood," Natalie said gently. "Would you like to discuss why?" Nora's voice was calm. "No, not this time." The young woman nodded and continued. Outside the glass, customers chatted, pens scratched against paper. Nora sat still, her reflection clear in the polished desk. For once, she didn't feel small in someone else's world. After a few minutes, Natalie slid a form across the table. "All transfers canceled. You'll maintain full control of your accounts." "Good," Nora said, signing with a steady hand. "One more thing," Natalie added. "Your son has power of attorney on one account. Do you wish to keep that in place?" Nora looked up, meeting her eyes. "Revoke it." "Yes, ma'am." Natalie printed another form. Nora signed again, her name looping cleanly across the line. "Done," the banker said softly. "Everything now belongs solely to you." Nora thanked her and stood. As she walked out into the morning, the light hit her face like affirmation. The air smelled of coffee and cold metal from passing cars. She didn't hurry. Each breath felt earned. She stopped at a cafe near the park. The waiter brought tomato soup and cornbread. She ate slowly, tasting every bite. Freedom, she thought, didn't roar. It whispered through moments like this: warm food, quiet air, no one waiting to take something from you. When she got home, the house greeted her with familiar stillness. She hung up her coat and filled the kettle again, the scent of tea and soap mixed with winter sunlight. At the table, she opened her notebook and wrote, "Today, I stopped paying rent on other people's comfort." She underlined it twice. The room filled with soft, golden light. She stood and reached for the pie dish on the top shelf, the same one she'd carried to the airport. She washed and dried it carefully, placing it back in its spot. Maybe one day she'd bake again. But not for them. Only for herself. Later, she walked through each room, touching small memories: her husband's old jacket, the photo of Emily at 5, the book she'd never finished. Nothing in the house demanded from her anymore. It simply existed, steady and hers. As evening fell, she made a simple dinner: grilled cheese, apple slices, chamomile tea. She set one plate, lit a candle, and ate slowly. The flicker of light painted her face in warm gold. It felt like ceremony, a quiet honoring of herself. When she finished, she stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and smelled faintly of pine. Across the street, a neighbor walked his dog. Another strung lights along her fence. The world turned on, unaware. Her phone buzzed inside, its vibration faint through the window. She didn't move to answer. She let it ring until silence returned. For the first time, the quiet wasn't emptiness. It was peace. She looked up at the stars just beginning to show. A deep calm filled her chest. The city hummed around her, distant and soft. "Let them wonder," she whispered to the night, a smile tugging at her lips. Then she went inside, turned off the lamp, and sat with her tea in the gentle dark. For the first time in years, she felt whole. The next morning unfolded in a soft gray mist that wrapped the Savannah streets like a shawl. Nora Bennett woke early, her body still tuned to the rhythm of quiet mornings. She brewed a pot of coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching fog drift between the trees. The air felt still, heavy with promise. On the counter lay a note she had written the night before. "Call Mr. Halpern. Confirm trust." The letters were sharp, decisive. She smiled faintly. Even her handwriting had stopped hesitating. By 9, she was dressed in her gray wool coat and walking toward her car. Frost glistened on the grass and the city glowed pale in the morning light. When she reached the office of Halpern and Associates, the brass door plate gleamed like a seal of closure. "Mrs. Bennet," said Mr. Halpern warmly as she entered. "You're early." "I like to get hard things done before lunch," Nora said, smiling. He gestured toward the chair across his desk. "I've prepared your documents. Let's go through them together." The papers lay in a neat stack: trust documents, a revised will, and a declaration of revocation. The lawyer's pen tapped lightly as he explained each page. "All your assets," he said, "your home, pension, and investments will transfer into the Bennet Family Trust, with your granddaughter Emily as sole beneficiary. You'll retain full control while you're living." Nora nodded, her gaze steady. "That's exactly what I want." Halpern hesitated. "Are you certain you want to exclude your son entirely?" "Yes," she said simply. "This isn't punishment, it's truth. They've had enough." He studied her face, then nodded. "Understood." He passed her the pen. "Then let's make it official." Her signature moved smoothly across each page. With every stroke of ink, the weight of years seemed to lift from her chest. When the signing was complete, Halpern gathered the papers and said quietly, "Few people reach this kind of clarity, Mrs. Bennet." She smiled faintly. "Clarity's what's left when you stop hoping someone will apologize." Outside, the morning fog was lifting. The sunlight caught on the wet pavement, making it gleam like glass. Nora walked to a small florist nearby. Red poinsettias filled the window, bright against the gray. She bought one, cradling it in her arms as she walked home. When she arrived, the phone was ringing. She almost ignored it, but then saw the caller ID, Emily. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, answering. "Grandma." Emily's voice was breathless and warm. "I got your letter. I didn't know what happened. Dad said you canceled your trip at the last minute." Nora exhaled slowly. "I didn't cancel anything, darling. I was there." I waited. Silence, then a soft gasp. "Oh, Grandma, I'm so sorry." "You didn't know," Nora said gently. "None of it was your fault." "I should have called," Emily murmured. "No," Nora interrupted kindly. "You've always called when it mattered." There was a pause, then Emily's voice trembled. "Can I come visit next weekend? I've got a few days off from classes." "Of course," Nora said. "The guest room's ready." "I'll bring the chessboard," Emily said, her tone brightening. "You think you can beat me this time?" "I've been practicing," Emily laughed. "Good," Nora said softly. "Then I'll make tea." They talked for a few more minutes about Emily's nursing classes, her cat, the cold weather up north. The conversation flowed easy, natural, like a forgotten melody returning. When the call ended, Nora sat still, her hand resting on the receiver. For a long time, she listened to the silence that followed. It didn't ache. It shimmered. She placed the poinsettia in the middle of the kitchen table. Its red petals glowed against the morning light. The house, so often muted, suddenly looked alive again, not because someone was coming, but because she wanted it to be ready. Later that afternoon, she sat by the window with her notebook. The sun pushed through the thinning fog, spilling gold across the page. She wrote, "Sign the trust today. Emily called. I am seen." She underlined the last 2 words once, slow and steady. As evening came, the world turned silver again. The fog drifted back through the trees, soft and forgiving. Nora lit a lamp, the golden glow pooling gently around her chair. She poured herself a cup of tea and whispered into the quiet, "It's enough." And for the first time in years, It truly was. Saturday morning came bright and cool, sunlight spilling through the lace curtains. Nora Bennett stood at her front door, straightening the welcome mat and brushing a leaf from her cardigan. For the first time in years, she was waiting for someone who wanted to come, not out of duty or guilt, but love. By noon, a train whistle echoed across the quiet Savannah streets. Nora's heart lifted. She drove to the station, her hand steady on the wheel. The air smelled faintly of rain and iron. When the doors slid open, she saw her, Emily, her granddaughter, tall, bright-eyed, wrapped in a gray coat and carrying a worn canvas bag. "Grandma!" Emily called, smiling as she ran forward. Nora barely had time to open her arms before the girl was there, hugging her tight. For a moment, the noise of the station fell away. "I missed you," Emily whispered. "I missed you too, baby," Nora said softly, holding her close. They drove home in quiet comfort. Emily talked about school, her patients at the clinic, the cat she'd rescued from an alley. Nora listened, smiling at the small details. The girl had her father's eyes, but her heart, steady, thoughtful, was entirely her own. Back home, Emily wandered through the house, tracing her fingers over framed photos and the piano keys her grandfather once played. "Everything's just the same," she said. "I like things where I can find them," Nora replied, smiling. The kettle whistled. Nora poured tea while Emily found 2 mugs, the ones with tiny blue flowers. They sat together, steam curling between them. "I read your letter again on the train," Emily said quietly. "It made me cry, but the good kind of cry." Nora chuckled softly. "Then I must have written it right." Emily hesitated. "Dad called. He said you made changes. He didn't sound happy." Nora's tone stayed calm. "He'll adjust. Some people mistake your peace for rebellion when they can't use you anymore." Emily let out a small laugh. "You sound fierce, Grandma. About time, don't you think?" They spent the afternoon playing chess in the living room. Emily lost the first round, won the second, and declared victory. Laughter filled the house, full, round, alive. It startled even Nora how natural it felt. By evening they cooked together, pasta with garlic and spinach, simple but rich. The scent of butter filled the kitchen. "Grandma," Emily said, stirring the sauce, "I used to think being strong meant never saying no." Nora smiled. "Real strength is knowing when to stop saying yes." After dinner, they sat by the fire, each holding a mug of chamomile tea. The poinsettia glowed red on the table between them. "Do you think Dad will ever understand?" Emily asked. "I don't need him to," Nora said gently. "Understanding is optional. Respect isn't." Emily was quiet for a moment, then leaned her head on her grandmother's shoulder. "You deserve peace." "I think I finally have it," Nora said, stroking her granddaughter's hair. Later, they washed dishes together, sleeves rolled up, laughter mixing with the sound of running water. Emily hummed a song Nora didn't know, something light and sweet. It sounded like youth, like beginnings. Before bed, Emily hugged her again. "Promise me you'll never doubt how loved you are." Nora smiled. Not anymore. When the house settled into silence, Nora lingered in the kitchen. The clock ticked softly, steady as a heartbeat. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Emily is here. The house remembers laughter. I am no longer waiting to be found. I have arrived." She set down the pen and looked toward the guest room. Through the cracked door came the soft rhythm of Emily's breathing. Nora made herself a final cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the moonlight spilled over the jasmine vines, their scent drifting through the open pane. She thought of the years she'd filled with noise, calls, obligations, explanations, and how none of it had ever sounded like this quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't ask her to fix or forgive. the kind that simply let her be. She looked at the faint reflection of her face in the window glass, lined, calm, alive. For so long she'd thought freedom meant walking away. Tonight she understood it also meant staying, but on her own terms. She smiled, soft and sure. "This is home," she whispered. And for the first time in decades, the silence that followed didn't echo, it answered. Sunday morning came soft and blue, the light creeping across the kitchen walls like watercolor. Nora Bennett woke to the smell of coffee drifting from downstairs. When she entered the kitchen, Emily stood at the stove, hair tied back, humming as she flipped pancakes. "Morning, Grandma," she said, smiling. "Morning, sweetheart," Nora replied. "You didn't have to cook." "I wanted to. You always made breakfast for me. I figured it's my turn." Nora smiled. "Then I'll try not to complain about the mess." They ate together at the table, sunlight warming their faces. Emily talked about her clinical rotations, the long nights, the kind patients who thanked her, the ones who didn't. Nora listened, eyes soft with pride. After breakfast, Emily wandered through the house, stopping at framed photos. "You know," she said quietly, "Dad doesn't have any pictures of you in his house. I asked him why once. He said he hadn't gotten around to it." "People tell small lies when they're trying to sound busy," Nora said gently. "I just don't understand him," Emily said, frowning. "You don't have to," Nora replied. "Some things stop making sense when you stop excusing them." Later, they went outside to the garden. The air was cool, damp from last night's rain. Nora knelt by her camellias, trimming carefully. Emily joined her, clumsy but eager. "You're cutting too much," Nora warned. "It's a bush, Grandma." "It's a living thing," Nora said with mock sternness. Emily laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight. By midday, the house smelled of fresh soil and tea. They sat by the window, watching light dance on the leaves. "Dad called again last night," Emily said quietly. "He asked if you were angry." Nora sipped her tea. "Anger takes energy. I'm using mine for better things." "He sounded lost," Emily murmured. "People get lost when the person they depend on stops waiting," Nora said. Emily smiled a little. "That's poetic." "It's practice," Nora said. "I've had a lot of time to rehearse." They spent the afternoon cooking carrots, onions, and broth, simmering on the stove. Emily stirred the pot, humming softly. "You know," she said, "I used to think being strong meant never saying no." "Strength," Nora said, "is saying no without explaining why." Dinner was simple: soup, bread, and laughter. They ate slowly, unhurried, every bite tasting like comfort. When the plates were empty, Emily picked up a photo album from the sideboard and carried it to the couch. "You kept everything," she said, flipping pages. "Even my terrible crayon drawings." "They're masterpieces," Nora teased. Emily smiled, her expression softening at a picture of Nora and Adrian years ago. "You looked happy then." "I was," Nora said, "but happiness needs two people willing to hold it. I was the only one holding on." Emily turned another page. "He doesn't get it, does he?" "No," Nora said, "and maybe he never will. But I can't keep handing people lessons they refuse to learn." Emily nodded slowly. "You're braver than me." Nora reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're young. You'll learn faster than I did." The evening drifted quiet. They washed dishes side by side, sleeves rolled up, talking about nothing and everything. When they finished, Emily leaned on the counter, smiling. "I haven't laughed this much in months." "That's because laughter requires safety," Nora said softly. "You can't laugh when you're walking on eggshells." Later, they sat in the living room, the lamp casting a soft amber glow. "Do you ever miss him?" Emily asked suddenly. "Your father." Emily nodded. "I miss who I thought he was," Nora said, "but that's different from missing the man himself." Emily leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder. "You deserve peace." "I think I found it," Nora whispered. When Emily went to bed, Nora stayed downstairs. The house was quiet, holding the faint smell of soap and tea. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Emily understands. She sees me, not for what I give, but for who I am." Then, after a pause, she added, "Greg called through her. The past knocks softly when it's scared. I don't need to answer." Outside, rain began again, soft against the windows. Nora listened to its rhythm, steady and soothing. Through the half-open door, she could hear Emily's gentle breathing. She smiled to herself. "She's my proof," she whispered. Something good grew after all. For the first time in years, Nora climbed the stairs without the weight of waiting. Upstairs, the air was warm, still holding the faint scent of rain. She turned off the hall light, her heart steady, her mind clear. Peace, she thought, isn't silence. It's knowing the noise doesn't own you anymore. Monday morning arrived pale and cold, sunlight spreading thinly across the kitchen tiles. Nora Bennett stood at the window, coffee in hand, listening to the hush that follows departure. Emily had left on the early train, her laughter still echoing faintly in the house. It wasn't silence anymore. It was peace. On the table lay a folded note in Emily's handwriting. "Call me when you miss me, or even when you don't." Nora smiled, tucking it into her notebook. She cleaned the kitchen slowly, savoring the rhythm of ordinary tasks. When she reached the cupboard, her fingers brushed the old pie dish, the one she'd once carried through the airport. This time, she didn't feel hurt. She simply placed it back on the shelf, a relic turned reminder. Survival could look quiet. By mid-morning, she sat at her desk sorting through papers. Greg's folder weighted, thick and worn. She opened it not out of resentment, but out of need. Checks, loan slips, tuition receipts, promises that had expired years ago. Each document felt like a weight she'd carried too long. Near the bottom, she found a yellowed note in Greg's handwriting. "Thanks, Mom. I'll make it up to you someday." She folded it once and dropped it into the trash. The phone rang. Without checking the caller ID, she answered. "Mom?" Greg's voice was careful, thin. "Good morning," Nora said. "I heard Emily came to visit," he said after a pause. "She didn't tell me until she got back." "She's grown," Nora replied. "She doesn't need permission to love her grandmother." He exhaled sharply. "Mom, can we talk? You've been distant." "I've been quiet," Nora said evenly. "There's a difference." "I saw the papers," he said, "from Halpern's office. You set up a trust. You removed me?" "Yes." He went silent. "Why would you do that?" "I adjusted things to fit reality," she said. "Reality being that I'm not part of your life and you're not part of mine." "That's not fair," Greg said, his tone rising. "After everything I've done for you." Nora's voice stayed calm. "You mean after everything I've done for you? I was at the airport, Greg. You were taking pictures without me." "That was a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "No," she said softly. "It was a choice." The silence that followed was long. He tried again, voice cracking. "I just don't understand why now. Because waiting for people to notice your worth is a slow kind of death," Nora said. "And I've done enough dying for one lifetime." "Mom, please," he whispered. "Let me make this right." "You can't fix what you refuse to see," she said. "Don't do this," he said. "We're family." "I was," Nora corrected. "You haven't been mine for a long time." He breathed hard, like a man searching for the right words but finding none. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I know," she replied gently. "And someday, maybe that will be enough for you. But it's already enough for me." She hung up. The silence that followed didn't sting, it settled, light and clean. She set the phone down and let her hand rest on the cool wood of the table. Outside, sunlight spilled through the blinds, drawing pale lines across the floor. Nora poured herself more coffee and sat still. For the first time in years, she felt no guilt, no tug to explain or soften her truth. She was steady in her own space, her own skin. At noon, she walked to the post office with a small brown parcel. Inside was a letter to Emily and copies of the trust papers. The letter read, "Keep these safe. They're not just about money, they're about choice. Never trade your peace for someone else's comfort." The clerk, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, smiled. "Sending something important?" "Something honest," Nora said. Back home, she brewed tea and sat on the porch with a blanket over her knees. The street was quiet except for the soft bark of a neighbor's dog. Her phone buzzed again, Greg's name glowing across the screen. She didn't move to answer. The sound faded, replaced by the whisper of wind through the jasmine vines. She opened her notebook and wrote, "He called. I didn't break. I didn't explain. That's progress." Beneath it, she added, "Emily will understand. She already does." The afternoon slipped by gently. The light shifted gold, then amber before surrendering to dusk. Nora turned on a single lamp and watched its glow spread through the room. She lifted her tea, letting the steam brush her face. "This," she whispered to no one in particular, "is freedom." And the quiet that followed didn't disagree. Tuesday morning arrived quiet and pale, the kind of light that softened edges and slowed time. Nora Bennett sat at her kitchen table, the steam from her coffee curling upward like breath. The house was still. Emily was gone, back to her world of classrooms and patience, yet the warmth of her presence lingered in every corner. It wasn't loneliness that filled the air. It was calm. She flipped open her notebook, pen poised above the page. The phone sat beside it, silent. She didn't check for messages. The world could wait a while. After breakfast, she began to sort through the house. It wasn't a purge, not quite, more like tending to an overgrown garden. A drawer of expired coupons, a box of forgotten knickknacks, cards from people who once meant well and then disappeared. Every object she touched asked a quiet question. Does this still serve me? Most didn't. By late morning, she climbed into the attic. Dust shimmered in long stripes of sunlight. Boxes lined the walls, some labeled neatly, others forgotten. One marked Greg. Childhood caught her eye. She sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it carefully. Inside were small relics, a paper turkey, old report cards, letters from summer camp, birthday drawings. One note in a child's scrawl read, "I love you, Mom, because you make the best cookies." Nora smiled softly. Beneath it lay photographs. Greg at 6, gap-toothed and grinning. Greg at 16, tall and full of plans. Greg at 40, standing beside his wife with a practiced smile. Her chest tightened, not from sadness, but from truth. She'd given him everything she had, time, patience, forgiveness, and somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing her as a person. At the bottom of the box, she found old letters from her late husband, David. His handwriting flowed with ease, strong even after years of work-worn hands. "Take care of yourself, love. You always forget that part." Nora closed her eyes. "I remember now," she whispered. She put the letters back, closed the lid, and tied the box shut. Some memories were meant to stay, but not to rule. Outside, the sun had climbed high. She grabbed her coat and went for a walk. The air smelled of pine and smoke from distant chimneys. On the sidewalk, a boy rode past on his bicycle, waving cheerfully. She waved back, smiling. Simple gestures, uncomplicated, real. At the park, she sat on a weathered bench, watching children chase each other across the grass. Parents called from picnic blankets, laughter rising like music. For the first time in years, she didn't ache watching families. Love, she realized, wasn't proximity. It was care, attention, presence. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Greg's name, a text. "Please call me. I just want to talk." Nora stared at the words, then locked the screen. Not every request deserved an answer. On the way home, she stopped at the bakery. The young clerk behind the counter smiled. "Haven't seen you in a while." "I've been clearing things out," Nora said. The woman chuckled. "Spring cleaning?" "Something like that," Nora replied. "A few decades late." She bought a loaf of warm bread and walked home slowly, letting the sun touch her face. In the kitchen, she sliced the bread, spread butter, and ate while standing by the counter. It tasted simple, rich, alive. For years, she'd prepared food for others, serving herself last. Today, she ate first. After lunch, she settled on the porch, wrapped in a shawl. The breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine and the rustle of leaves. Across the street, a neighbor hung white lights along the fence, their glow flickering softly in the early dusk. Nora thought of Emily's laughter, of how light it had made the house. Maybe the future didn't need to be loud. Maybe peace could be quiet and still matter just as much. When the first chill crept in, she went inside and opened her notebook again. Her handwriting flowed easily. Cleaned the attic. Let go of ghosts, not in anger, but gratitude. They taught me where to stop kneeling. She underlined the last line twice, then added, "Forgiveness isn't about letting people back in. It's about setting yourself free." The phone rang again. Greg's name lit up the screen. She let it ring until it faded into silence. The room grew dim as the sun slipped lower. She poured chamomile tea, watching the golden surface ripple. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, small, steady stars in the dark. Nora stood by the window, her reflection framed by soft light. For years, she'd seen herself as someone waiting to be remembered. Now she saw something else, someone who had finally remembered herself. She smiled faintly and whispered, "That's enough." And for the first time, it truly was. Wednesday morning arrived clear and cold. The air smelled of rain and cedar, the kind of morning that felt like it wanted to begin something new. Nora Bennett rose early, the quiet of her small Savannah house greeting her like an old friend. She brewed coffee, opened the blinds, and watched sunlight pour across the floorboards. Outside, the jasmine was beginning to fade, petals scattered like small confessions across the porch. She made breakfast, buttered toast, and turned on the radio. A slow jazz tune filled the room, low and unhurried. Each sound, the pop of the toaster, the hum of the kettle, felt like a rhythm she had learned to live by. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Nora wasn't expecting anyone. She peered through the peephole and froze. On the porch stood Malene, her daughter-in-law, impeccably dressed, posture tight, eyes unreadable. Nora hesitated, then opened the door. "Malene," she said evenly. "Hello, Irene," the woman replied, using her first name with that familiar, practiced sweetness. "Can we talk?" Nora stepped aside. "If you think it will help." Malene entered, glancing around as though taking inventory. "You look well," she said politely. "I am," Nora replied. "Would you like tea?" "Sure." They sat at the kitchen table, steam curling between them. For a moment, the house was filled with nothing but the ticking of the clock. Finally, Malene said, "Greg's worried about you. You haven't been answering his calls." "I know," Nora said simply. Malene frowned. "He just wants to make things right." "Does he?" Nora asked softly. "Or does he want things easy again?" "That's not fair. It's honest." Malene inhaled sharply. He thought your flight was the next day. The picture from Thanksgiving. It wasn't meant to hurt you." "It didn't," Nora said. "It clarified things." The younger woman blinked. "Clarified? That I don't belong in a story where my presence is optional." Mayleen's composure cracked for a moment. "Greg said you changed your will, that you removed him." "I did," Nora said. "Everything goes to Emily." "That's not right," Mayleen said quickly. "He's your son." "And I was his mother," Nora said evenly. He forgot that part. Silence stretched long and thin. "I came here hoping we could fix this," Mayleen said finally. "Family matters." "It does," Nora agreed. "That's why I'm protecting the only part of it that still remembers how to love." Mayleen looked away, her voice tightening. "You've changed." "I have," Nora said, "for the better." "Greg won't take this lightly," Mayleen warned. "He already took everything else lightly," Nora replied. "Maybe now he'll learn weight." Mayleen stood abruptly, gathering her purse. "I'm sorry you feel this way." "No," Nora said gently. "You're sorry I stopped accepting less than I deserve." Mayleen hesitated at the door, cheeks flushed. Then she left, her heels clicking down the steps until the sound vanished. Nora stood there for a moment, hand still on the knob, feeling the echo of the woman's perfume fade into nothing. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. She made another cup of tea, carried it to the porch, and sat down. Across the street, a boy chased a dog through a yard, both laughing in their own way. Life continued, unbothered. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, Greg again. She watched the screen light up, then dim. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened her notebook and wrote, "Mayleen came. She wanted comfort, not truth. I gave her the truth." She paused, then added, "I don't hate them. I just stopped volunteering for my own disappearance." The afternoon passed quietly. She washed dishes, watered her plants, and hummed along with the radio. When she looked up, sunlight had shifted across the wall, turning gold near evening. She thought about Emily, about laughter spilling through the house, about how good it felt to be seen without condition. Maybe that was the point, not to rebuild what had broken, but to keep what still breathed. As twilight deepened, Nora lit 2 candles on the table. Their flames danced gently, glowing against the window. She poured herself a glass of red wine, raised it toward the empty chair across from her, and said, "To clarity." She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her chest. The air outside was cool, faintly scented with pine and salt from the nearby coast. Somewhere, a church bell chimed 6 slow notes. Nora smiled, setting the glass down. "You hear that?" she murmured to the quiet. "That's peace. Took me long enough to recognize it." Her phone vibrated once more. She didn't check. Instead, she blew out 1 candle, leaving the other flickering softly. She reached for her notebook again and wrote the day's final line. "If you've ever been forgotten, remember yourself. That's where it begins." Then she closed it gently, leaned back in her chair, and let the stillness settle around her, warm, honest, and entirely her own. Outside, the last candle burned steady against the dark, a small light that refused to go out.